Okay. I'm gonna go with CPSD, exam 2, D3, resolve internal conflicts. So manage internal stakeholder concerns and opposition and resolve conflicts pertaining to supplier diversity. Several techniques can be employed to generate feedback. Quarterly performance review, technique in which the internal customer, business unit, and supply management review key performance indicators, as opposed to the SBR or supplier business review. This is the QPR quarterly, that's internal. Offsite workshops. This type of workshop can be a useful way to brainstorm, review supplier diversity program goals, identify commonalities and disconnects, and ensure alignment of activities. And feedback audits. Use of a third-party consultant to perform independent interviews to identify the strengths and weaknesses of those involved with the supplier diversity program. Surveys. You can survey internal customers, and you can also survey the diverse suppliers. Also, supply management blog can be set up where internal customers and diverse suppliers can post feedback and suggestions. You also have 360-degree surveys, which incorporates appraisals from supervisors, co-workers, subordinates, and external suppliers, kind of everybody. Summary results are used to measure individual and group performance against program expectations for a 360-degree survey. And presentations about the supplier diversity program to other members of the supply management team, to internal customers, and to senior management, and to external organizations. Confidentiality. So organizations need to have standard procedures in place that are communicated with all internal team members. Confidential information is one of them. So confidential information about one supplier should not be shared with other suppliers or others at all. Buying organizations should institute a policy of whether and how to consider products or services that are different from those specified in a bid, because you'll get them. Some organizations have a policy of informing all suppliers of the name of the successful supplier in the bidding process. The debriefing process should also include internal customers and any third-party organizations that will be involved in the contract also should be advised. So in government purchasing, you usually must, by law, disclose the winning bidder, and it's all sealed bid stuff with a due date. With private industry, you got more leeway. You don't have to reveal the winning bidder to the supply base, although I think it's good policy to do that. You also can give feedback on bids to a supplier if they're too high or too low by general amounts. It's illegal to do that stuff in government procurement, but you can get away with a lot more in private industry. Organizational functional requirements. A few of the key business areas include finance. This is where funding, budgets, and business services like accounts payable reside. Human resources. HR is home to diversity and inclusion. Usually HR has the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer or the Chief Diversity Officer, CDO. Employee resource groups are also usually based and managed through HR. And legal Tier 2 reporting is a key part of successful strategy. Legal also works with the sales organization on RFX replies and review of sales collateral. Marketing and PR create contact ads and for media publications and other tools for spreading supplier diversity message. Sales and operation. This department helps tie supplier diversity initiatives to revenue sources, which assists in advocacy. If you can see it's making money, it's always a good thing. The sales group is on board, the rest of the company will follow. Technology will help provide the data necessary for third-party reporting of tier 1 and tier 2 spend, and indirect dollars are usually the biggest area of opportunity for supplier diversity because you can use smaller suppliers there more easily. And usually the barriers to entry in those industries are not huge. All right. Now, conflict resolution. We have 4 types of organizational conflict: intra-individual, interpersonal, intragroup, and intergroup. So, you got a intra and an inter, so within, outside. We got going here. And 3 sources. Okay, so this is just talking about the sources and types of conflict. This is a white paper on it, and it runs number of pages. So 4 types, really: individual and group, intra and inter, and then 3 sources: competition for scarce resources, drives for autonomy, and divergence of goals. Sources of organizational conflict. So you got divergence of goals, or incompatible goals and time horizons, drive for autonomy, overlapping authority, divergence of goals, task interdependencies, divergence of goals, incompatible evaluation reward systems. So we got a few of them there for divergence of goals, competition for scarce resources within the company, and drive for autonomy, status inconsistencies. All these can lead to organizational conflict. So conflict resolution. This is the structured approach. The leader or team facilitator should employ a structured conflict resolution approach. Identify the causes of the conflict. Determine the criteria acceptable to the team for a solution. Generate solution options without regarding the possibility of acceptance or feasibility, so brainstorm. From the options generated in the preceding step, determine possible solution, narrow the list to those that are feasible. And then determine the best solution. If necessary, use consensus building methods and achieve consensus on the best solution. So that's the conflict resolution structured approach. Pretty intuitive. And here it is again. Identify causes, determine criteria, generate solutions, determine feasible solutions, determine best solution, achieve consensus. Consensus building. So ways to achieve consensus require clear thinking and defined methods. So here's some ideas on how to get consensus in a group. Use a rating scale indicating team member buy-in, 1 to 9, Likert scale, basically. Multi-voting. Members vote on more than one option and then vote again on a list, like the top 25. Elections are often done this way. You have the whole list the first round, and then you narrow it to the top quarter, 25% the second round. And then teams should make a decision on team processes such as how consensus will be achieved when the team is forming. All right. There's often questions on Pondi's 5 stages of conflict. And I'll just ask you a question like, if this person's doing X, what stage of conflict are they in? So here's all about Pondi and his conflict model. You often see questions on this. So there's 5 stages. There's the latent stage, where participants are only vaguely aware of conflict. There's the perceived stage, where participants are explicitly aware conflict exists and can ID the difficulties or differences of opinion. And then you move to the felt stage, where stress and anxiety by one or more participants who then internalize tension, which results in dysfunctional conflict. So the felt stage is where you start to get dysfunctional. And then the manifest stage, you're into open warfare. And the outsiders can see that there's conflict within the group. And the aftermath, outcome of the conflict, resolution or dissolution of the original problem. Did you fix it or not? So that's Pondi's 5 stages. There's another model that talks about 5 stages, 5 different stages. These are the 5 stages: potential opposition or incompatibility, cognition and personalization, intentions, behavior, outcomes. There's more on that if you're interested. So this is Pondi's model. Participants are only vaguely aware of conflict, that's a latent stage. Participants are explicitly aware of conflict, that's perceived conflict. They know it's there. Then it goes to felt, where you're starting to get anxiety by the participants and you're starting to get dysfunctional behaviors here. And then manifest conflict, the conflict can be observed by those outside the group. And then resolution or dissolution of the problem, conflict aftermath. How did it end up? Now, these are the second one. These 5-stage conflict model process, that's what this looks like. So stage 1, potential opposition or incompatibility, communication structure, personal variables. Stage 2, you got perceived and felt conflict, which is different from Pondi. And then stage 3, you got conflict handling intentions. And then they go into, this is very common, these 4 different personality types, or 5 different personality types. You got the competing type, you got the collaborating type, you got the compromising type, the avoiding type, and the accommodating type. And usually people have a dominant one of these, but they also have aspects of others depending on the situation. Overt conflict, what are the parties' behavior? And then you either come with increased group performance if you successfully deal with the conflict, or decrease group performance if you don't, which is outcomes, intentions, behaviors, and outcomes. All right, mediation. So a neutral third party works with the buyer and supplier to help them reach a mutual agreement on how to resolve the conflict. The mediation process is voluntary, and outcome from mediation is non-binding. Non-binding, you don't have to do it. Mediation may be transformed into arbitration and become binding. So arbitration is usually a judge or a retired judge or something like that. And once they make the decisions, both parties have agreed to be bound by that decision. Mediation, neither party has agreed to be bound by the decision. All right, risk management. Conducting activities that reduce, eliminate, or mitigate damage or loss to the business. So risk management theories is 4-step. Identify the risk, quantify the risk, assign responsibility for management, and then come up with a mitigation plan. So risk assessment, it's kind of the first 2, A and B. What are the risks and how bad are they? You're identifying and quantifying the risk. Greatly affected by the availability and quality of the supplier data. Yeah. Risk mitigation, it's in the last step, entails specific steps undertaken by managers to reduce the impact of factors that might cause loss, damage, or failure, and thus reduce the liability of the organization and its intentions with various stakeholder groups. So here's your risk management theory. Identifying the risk, brainstorming experience. This half is risk assessment. And then you rate the risk as on likelihood of occurrence and how bad would the impact be if it did occur. So usually on like 1 to 10 scales. So that's the final part of risk assessment. And then you're assigning responsibility and coming up with a risk mitigation plan. Identifies risk framework identifies and quantifies the risk of supply disruption by describing the attributes of the suppliers. So relationship factors, past performance, human resource factors, history of disruption, environment, disaster history, financial factors. A set of questions need to be developed with response scales that will lead to a numerical score for each of the above attributes. And then planning for risk, a 5-step approach to the risk management can be used for risk and response planning. So although this is your risk theory, management theory, this is your response or your risk management or your response planning. Confirm the scope, interview stakeholders, identify, you talk to the risks, conduct an impact assessment, and this is the 1 to 10 Likert scale. How bad would it be if it happened? Define alternatives, develop plans. When you're defining alternatives, you're coming up with ways to lessen the risk. Then you develop plans to lessen those risks, and then you implement readiness. So a risk profile can include a supplier, a group of suppliers, or a supplier network. Usually you get some kind of numerical score to go with the risk profile and 2 methods to create it. You can use the risk framework from slide 14, which is this one here. Oops, no, this one. Or this one. And you can use a spreadsheet with a heat map, which is probably the more common approach. So, yeah, pretty common. So that's the source of the risk. Business area, source, risk description, source of the risk, what could go wrong, impact and likelihood, assurance, inherent risk, residual risk. These are all things that generate the dashboard. Inherent is the risk unmitigated. Residual is that amount of risk that's left over after mitigation plans. Planning questions for a risk management plan. So is top management support ensured? So these are some questions you can ask yourself. Have action processes for contingencies been well defined? Have risk assessments been thorough? Is the process mainly aimed at speed to recovery? And have critical or weak links been identified to mitigate risk? All right. Got a group question here, otherwise known as a recall question. Which of the following stages of conflict is where the involved parties internalize tension and consequently results in dysfunctional conflict? Now, looking at these stages, felt, latent, manifest, you're dealing with Pondi's model. So which one in Pondi's model do they start to internalize tension and start to get dysfunctional conflict? It's not the latent stage. That's the first one. The manifest stage is towards the end. Or I guess latent is second, perceived is first. So it's got to be felt. You want one in the middle. Option A it is. Okay. What level are the risk management procedures most often developed? Individual sites, corporate function areas, geographic regions, supply production lines. I would say individual sites more than likely. Let's see what they say. Yep, individual sites risk management should be considered at many levels, including an organization-wide basis. However, it is done at the individual site, since the risk of disruption to production and distribution has to be examined at that level. Okay. So these summary slides, ISM started with this latest 2022 version. A successful relationship with internal stakeholders and customers must be maintained. A 360-degree survey is used to help facilitate a more rounded perspective. Got some typos here. It incorporates appraisals from supervisors, coworkers, subordinates, and suppliers. Feedback audits, use of a third-party consultant to perform independent interviews to identify the strengths and weaknesses of those involved with the supplier diversity program. Feedback audits, remember that. Off-site workshops, type of workshop that can be a very useful way to brainstorm, basically. Review the program goals, identify disconnects and commonalities. Mediation is a neutral third party that works with the buyer and the supplier or two other parties to help them reach a mutual agreement on how to resolve the conflict. It is non-binding. Arbitration is binding. So risk mitigation details specific steps undertaken by managers to reduce the impact of factors that might cause loss, damage, or failure, and thus reduce the liability of the organization in its relations with various stakeholders. And that's it for the slideshow. Now, I have to go do some questions. That's D3, so we want the questions for D3. And we've got how many questions? 7, 11. You got 13 questions. I'd probably do at least 10 of them on your own. Might want to just do all 13. The answers are located in the answer file. And you want D3 answers to practice questions. There you go. All right.